She dies at midnight. Stop him if you can. Jesus.
Pretty girl.
Midnight, Earl. Bring the photo. Or she stops breathing first.
The envelope had no return address, no stamp, no reason to exist after 40 years of silence. Earl Hughes almost tossed it into the pile of junk mail until he saw the handwriting, a style that belonged to a dead decade. The letter inside read, "She dies at midnight. Stop him if you can." The problem? The letter was postmarked 1979. After 40 years of service, Earl Hughes, a retired black postal worker in Baltimore, expected his golden years to be quiet, spent on the porch of his East Baltimore row house with a cup of coffee and his grandkids' laughter. But when he begins receiving old, undelivered letters predicting crimes, Earl is dragged into a mystery stretching back decades. The first letter is a warning about a woman's murder that supposedly happened in 1979, until news breaks that a woman has been killed exactly as described last night. Now Earl realizes these letters are not relics, they're instructions, and someone wants him in the game. If he can't decode the letters and stop the next crime, his own name might be on the final envelope. Quick heads up before we jump in. If you're into real stories, strange disappearances, and the kind of truths people try to bury, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. All right, let's get into it. Earl Hughes had sorted letters for 40 years. Bills, birthday cards, eviction notices, you name it, he'd seen it. After retiring last spring, he thought he'd seen the last of stamped envelopes. Thought he'd left all that behind until today. He sat on his porch, East Baltimore sun, creeping through heavy clouds, a chipped coffee mug warming his hands. The neighborhood was quieter than when he started on Route 12 back in '78. The corner stores were gone, the stoops empty. The letter arrived in yesterday's mail, mixed in with grocery flyers and a glossy furniture catalog. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Yellowed, worn edges sealed tight, but the details made his pulse tap harder. The handwriting looping cursive neat, like someone's grandmother taught them right. The postmark October 3, 1979. No sender's name, no return address. He turned it over twice before sliding a butter knife under the flap. Inside was a single sheet-lined paper, faint blue ink that had bled with time. She dies at midnight. Stop him if you can. That was it. No name, no explanation, just a dare from the grave. Earl chuckled under his breath. At first, some old prank? A misdelivered letter stuck in some long-forgotten crate? He should have tossed it and gone back to his coffee, but then his eyes caught the second. Line scrawled faintly at the bottom, like an afterthought. Lombard Street, same place as before. He sat back in his chair, heart tightening. Lombard Street. That was part of his old route 40 years ago. He hadn't thought about that stretch of cracked sidewalks and row houses in decades. A siren wailed faintly in the distance. Baltimore always had sirens, but this one didn't fade like the others. It grew louder, closer. Earl looked up just as a police cruiser barreled down the block lights, spinning blue and red siren, slicing the gray morning. Then another, then an ambulance. They turned onto Lombard Street. Earl stood there on his porch, letter trembling in his fingers as the sound swallowed him whole. The news didn't take long to reach Earl's living room. He sat in his recliner, the letter still in his hand, while Channel 11 flashed breaking news matters across the screen. Baltimore police are investigating an early morning homicide on Lombard Street. The victim identified as 43-year-old Darlene Watts was found in her apartment shortly after midnight. Neighbors reported hearing screams, but by the time authorities arrived, it was too late. Earl muted the TV and stared at the photo. They showed a smiling woman in a bright yellow sundress, the kind of photo taken in good light on a better day. 43 years old. The letter had said she dies at midnight. The coffee in his mug had gone cold. Earl reached for the letter again, holding it like it might explain itself if he stared long enough. The ink was faded, but not gone, each loop of the cursive clear. As Sunday scripture, it didn't make sense. The postmark read 1979, a time when Darlene Watts would have been an infant, maybe not even born yet. So how the hell did someone predict her death last night in words written decades ago? His mind chewed the facts like old bread. Either the postmark was fake, or he didn't finish the thought. He didn't want to. The sirens outside had faded, but their echo clung to him. By noon, Earl was behind the wheel of his old Ford, the letter folded neatly in his jacket pocket. His daughter Monica had called earlier, asking why he sounded strange. He lied, told her he was fine. Truth was he couldn't sit still. He drove through streets that had once been the arteries of his life blocks. He knew like the back of his hand when he walked them with a mailbag slung over his shoulder. But Baltimore had changed, cracked stoops boarded, windows fresh murals shouting names of the dead. Lombard Street hadn't gotten prettier. Yellow tape stretched across the sidewalk near a brick row house with paint peeling like sunburned skin. 2 patrol cars idled at the curb, their light bars silent. Now a crowd of neighbors huddled nearby, trading whispers like currency. Earl parked a block away and slipped into the slow rhythm of the scene, nodding at a man he didn't know, blending like old furniture in a room no one dusted. The apartment was the same building he used to deliver to back. In '85, he remembered it, door always stuck in the winter, kids racing down the hallway, the smell of fried fish thick in the stairwell. Now it smelled like rain and copper. He edged closer to the caution tape. The hum of voices filling his ears said they found her on the floor. Blood everywhere. Police don't know nothing, never do. Earl's gaze slid to the stoop. The front door was cracked open, and for a moment he caught the blur of uniforms inside. But it wasn't the police that made his stomach turn. It was the wall. Just above the doorframe, carved into the old brick, faint and jagged like a whisper. No one was supposed to hear, were 3 letters, RSP. Earl's throat dried. Those letters weren't random. He'd seen them before on the back of an envelope during his early years at the post office. A return address no one could trace. A phantom sender everyone called Return to Sender Phantom back in the day. RSPA. Joke at first, until people started disappearing. Earl stepped back, his heart thudding like the drums from Sunday service. The wind picked up, flipping the edge of his jacket. That was when he saw it wedged between the iron railing and the cracked stoop. An envelope, yellowed, worn. He bent down slow, his knees protesting. A handwriting stopped him cold, same neat cursive, same faded ink. He slid it free, inside a single line. Not the first, not the last, no signature, just a date scrawled in red ink at the bottom. October 7th, 2024, 5 days from now. And below that a name. Henry Cole. Earl's hands shook. Henry Cole wasn't just a name from a phone book. He was Earl's oldest friend. Earl slipped the letter inside his jacket and walked fast to his car, every step echoing like a countdown. This wasn't a prank, wasn't a mistake. Someone was writing a list, and now Earl was on the clock. Earl didn't go home. He drove past familiar blocks that felt like ghosts' row houses, leaning like tired old men liquor stores, with metal grates pulled halfway down, kids tossing a ball in the middle of cracked asphalt streets. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have. The second letter lay on the passenger seat, its message burning in his mind. Not the first, not the last. October 7, 2024. Henry Cole. Henry, damn fool. Henry, always running his mouth, always at that same card table down on Edmondson Avenue. They'd been friends since high school, back when trouble wore an easier face. Now Henry's name sat in faded ink like a death sentence. Earl pulled into the narrow alley behind a corner bar called Gibson's, a spot that hadn't changed much since the '80s. Same busted neon sign, same sticky floors inside, same men hunched over dominoes like they were solving the world's problems. He found Henry where he expected him, back booth, bourbon sweating in a glass, his wide shoulders hunched, the years carved deep into his face. Look who decided to crawl out his porch chair. Henry grinned when he saw Earl's laugh rough. As gravel retirement treating you that good? Earl slid into the seat, lowering his voice. You got a minute? Henry shrugged. Got plenty. Ain't like I'm catching a flight. Earl leaned closer, the bar's dim light pooling over their faces. Somebody's playing a sick game, Henry, and your name's in it. Henry chuckled. The hell you talking about? Earl pulled the letter from his jacket and laid it on the table. Henry squinted at the neat cursive, the date, a single name that was his. His smirk faded. This some kind of joke? He asked, voice dropping an octave. I wish it was. Earl explained everything, the first letter, the postmark, from 1979, the murder on Lombard Street, how the letter had predicted it down to the damn hour. Henry stared at him, the hum of the jukebox and the clatter of dominoes filling the space between their words. You saying somebody knew I was next? 5 days from now? Looks that way. Earl's voice was flat. You remember RSP? Henry froze. The letters meant something to him, too. Back in the day, whispers about a postal ghost who sent letters nobody wanted to receive. They thought it was just street talk, until rumors about missing folks started swirling. Henry rubbed his jaw. That was a long time ago, Earl. Not long enough, Earl said. They sat there in silence, two old men staring at a piece of paper that suddenly felt heavier than lead. Henry finally pushed the letter back. So what you gonna do? Go to the cops? Tell him a letter from 1979 is killing people in 2024? He snorted. They'll stick you in the psych ward. I'm not going to the cops, Earl said. I'm going to find out who's behind this. Henry raised a brow. You? But you a detective now. Don't need to be a detective, Earl said, standing, slowly sliding the letter back into his pocket. Just need to know where the trail starts. That night, Earl sat at his kitchen table with both letters spread out in front of him like puzzle pieces, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, a half-empty bottle of Old Granddad by his elbow. The handwriting same, the paper same, lined sheets, same ink bleeding faintly with time. Whoever wrote these had steady hands, careful hands. He turned the first letter over and spotted something he'd missed earlier, a faint, almost invisible stamp, pressed into the paper like someone had leaned on a rubber seal too lightly. He held it up to the light. The letters emerged slow like ghosts. BPOE, number 317. He frowned. BPOE, Elks Lodge. He knew that stamp. There was a lodge hall not far from Lombard Street, old as sin. He hadn't set foot inside in years. Earl scribbled the address on a notepad, his pen trembling. He glanced at the clock, 11:07 p.m. When he looked back at the table, his stomach dropped. A third envelope sat there. He hadn't heard the door, didn't hear a knock, but it was there, yellowed edges curling, laid neat on top of the others, like it had always belonged. Earl reached for it, slow, every nerve screaming. The flap tore open easy. Inside, one sentence in that same perfect cursive. You can't stop what you started. And below it, written in red, this time bold, as blood next you. Earl's breath caught his heart pounding loud in his ears. The letters weren't warnings anymore. They were promises. The rain started before dawn, a steady gray curtain drumming on rooftops, hissing against Earl's windshield as he turned down Lombard Street. The Elks Lodge loomed ahead, a squat brick building crouched between two boarded-up row houses. The sign above the door, BPOE, number 317, was chipped and faded, the white letters cracked like old bones. Earl cut the engine and sat for a long moment staring at the dark windows. A place like this used to be alive. Friday fish fries, slow jazz on. Saturday's laughter spilling out to the street. Now it looked like a tomb. He slid the latest letter from his pocket and read it again. You can't stop what you started, next you. His stomach twisted. He didn't know what game he'd stumbled into, but the rules were written in blood and ink. He stepped out into the rain, collar up, the chill biting through his jacket. The lodge door creaked when he pushed it open, a smell of mildew and stale liquor rushing at him. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with years of silence. The bar was gone, just splintered wood and overturned stools. Tables stacked against the wall, chairs missing legs, and dust. So much dust it dulled the light, seeping through cracked blinds. He moved slow boots, echoing on worn floorboards. Somewhere in the shadows a shape stirred. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was rough female, and came from the far corner, near a sagging pool table. Earl squinted and saw her thin as a shadow hair, wrapped in a faded scarf, a long gray coat swallowing her frame. She sat on a stool, like she'd been waiting years for someone to come through that door. Earl kept his hands visible. "Didn't mean to startle you, ma'am." She laughed a dry, brittle sound. "Takes more than an old postman to scare me." Her eyes flicked to the letters in his hand. "You got one, didn't you?" Earl froze. "How you know about that?" "Because she said, sliding off the stool with slow grace, 'My husband got the first one 45 years ago.'" Her words hit like a hammer. Earl felt the room tilt, the boards under his boots groaning. What do you mean, the first one?" She stepped closer, her face worn, but sharp eyes carrying the weight of something heavy and old. "Back then, they called it the Phantom. Postman RSP. That's what they carved on the bricks. My husband worked this hall, same as I did. We thought it was a joke letters, warning people letters, promising things that never made sense. Until the night a man got shot outside this very door." She pointed to a dark stain on the floorboards. So old it was part of the wood. Now Earl's pulse thudded in his ears. "Why didn't you go to the police?" She gave him a look sharp enough to cut, "Go to the cops?" "Maybe some of those letters had their names on them. We learned quick this wasn't something you reported. It was something you survived." Earl swallowed hard, the letters burning against his palm. "You're telling me this has been going on for 40 years? Longer." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Long as this city's been keeping secrets." She reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in an old silk handkerchief. Unfolding it slow, she revealed a single yellowed envelope. The ink had faded to the color of ghosts, but the handwriting was the same as the letters. Earl had. She handed it to him. "Read it," she said. Earl hesitated, then slid the paper free. His throat clenched as he read the words. "October 7th, 2024, same blood, different day," and under it the name, Henry Cole. Earl's fingers trembled. How did you?" She cut him off with a raised hand. "They're circling back, Earl. Hughes finishing what they started. And if you keep sniffing around, you won't make it to see what happens next." Earl stared at her, the room spinning, his heart punching against his ribs. "Who's they?" he rasped. Her lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ask the men who built this lodge, if they're still breathing," before he could speak again. A sound sliced through the silence. A sharp squeal of tires outside, then a car door slamming. Heavy footsteps on wet pavement. The woman's eyes widened, fear flickering like a candle. About to go out, she shoved the letter back into his hands. "Go," she hissed. "Before they add your name twice." Earl turned toward the door, just as it swung open hard, the cold rain rushing in with two shadows behind it. One of them spoke, voice deep and low. "Earl Hughes, we need a word." Rain beat against the door like impatient knuckles as Earl turned toward the sound. Two men filled the frame, broad, hard faces under dripping all-caps jackets, too heavy for a casual visit. One of them had a scar running from ear to jaw, like a jagged river. The woman beside Earl, stiffened eyes cutting toward the back. Hallway. Earl felt her urgency before she spoke. "Basement," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Go?" Now she didn't wait for him to answer. Her hand shoved him toward a side door as the men stepped inside, boots thunking on the warped floor. "Mr. Hughes' scar," said again, voice calm but cold like ice over deep water. "No need to run. We just want to talk." Earl didn't believe that. For a second, his knees ached, but adrenaline greased them as he slipped through the narrow hallway and down a flight of stairs, so steep they felt like a fall disguised as steps. The basement hit him with a wall of damp air, and the smell of mildew mixed with something metallic. He landed on concrete slick, with rainwater leaking from somewhere above. The single bulb dangling from the ceiling, barely held a glow, making shadows stretch like dark fingers. Behind him a door slammed upstairs. Voices murmured, then boots started moving. Earl scanned the basement, fast-rusted filing cabinets, stack of broken chairs, an old pool table leaning on one leg. But what caught him was the far wall. A row of canvas mailbags stacked neatly, their faded stencils still legible U.S. mail. He stepped closer. These weren't just abandoned. They were sealed tight cords knotted hard. Dust blanketed them, but the tags looked newer. The handwriting on each was too familiar, looping cursive, precise as a knife. The first tag read number 28. Delivered, the next number 29. Delivered, and the third one froze his blood, number 30 scheduled. He reached for the third bag, fingers trembling. When he tugged it open, a rush of stale air puffed out, carrying the sour scent of old paper. Inside were envelopes, hundreds of them yellowed, but perfectly stacked like soldiers at attention. Everyone bore the same handwriting. Earl pulled the top letter free, tore it open, and read, "You can't stop the route. The dead letters must be delivered." Next, Henry Cole. Below that, a line in red ink, "Witness included." A chill raked down his spine. Witness, that meant him. The boots upstairs grew louder, descending the stairs. Now Earl stuffed the letter in his jacket, eyes darting for another way out. His gaze snagged on a rusted door, half hidden behind a stack of chairs. The hinges were rotten, the lock barely hanging on. He lunged for it, just as the basement door banged open behind him, light slicing down the steps, and voices booming like thunder. Mr. Hughes' Scar's voice snapped through the dark. "Step away from the bags." Earl's fingers clawed at the lock, ripping it free with a groan of rusted metal. The door yawned open, revealing a narrow passage, choked with cobwebs and the smell of earth. A tunnel. He slipped inside and slammed it shut behind him, the echo of his breath loud in his ears. Boots pounded concrete, voices cursed. Earl moved blind hands, grazing the cold stone walls as the tunnel swallowed him whole. Behind him, Scar's voice floated through the dark, like a promise. "You can run, old man, but this route always ends the same." The tunnel seemed endless. Earl's breath rasped loud in the narrow dark as his shoes crunched through grit and something that felt like damp earth. His palms scraped stone fingers, finding grooves like veins in a bone. The air grew colder the farther. He went until his joints ached with it. He couldn't stop picturing those mailbags, stacked like tombstones, each marked like some grim ledger, delivered scheduled, and his friend's name inked in that neat, cruel cursive, Henry Cole. Finally, after what felt like half an hour, a dim glow teased the edges of the black Earl, stumbled toward it, heart banging like a church bell in his chest. The glow widened into a metal grate slick with rain, and beyond it the shimmer of streetlights. He pushed, and the grate screeched open like it hadn't moved in decades. The night air hit him sharp and cold. He crawled out into an alley behind a shuttered barber shop, collapsing against the wet pavement for a second, gulping in air like a drowning man. He checked the street, empty, except for puddles reflecting the jaundiced glow of a street lamp. The city hummed quiet in the rain, but Earl knew that quiet lied. Somewhere out there, Scar and his partner were still hunting. He walked fast, collar-up, hands jammed in his jacket. His car was back on Lombard, but going there was suicide. So he cut across back streets, moving like the ghosts that owned them now. By the time he reached his block, dawn was smearing gray across the rooftops. Earl's bones groaned as he climbed his porch steps, each one screaming at him to stop digging, stop running, stop trying to drag light into a place that only knew dark. But he couldn't, not with Henry marked, not with his own name now part of the game. He slid the key into the lock, pushed the door open, and froze. The house smelled wrong. Too still, too staged. Earl's gut clenched as his eyes swept the living room. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. Everything exactly where he'd left it, except for one thing. On his recliner sat an envelope, not yellowed like the others, but crisp white new, his name written in the same looping script, elegant as poison, Mr. Hughes. His stomach dropped as he crossed the room. Legs trembling like wet rope, he tore the flap with hands that didn't feel like his own. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, the ink dark and bold this time, as if shouting Root resumes. Next stop your porch, and below scrawled in thick red ink, like fresh blood, deadline midnight, Earl's breath caught in his throat, midnight. That was less than 18 hours away. He turned the page over, but something slid out and fluttered to the floor. A photograph. Earl bent slow, his knees screaming. When he saw the photo, his heart kicked so hard it hurt. It was him sitting on this very porch yesterday morning, coffee mug in hand, sunlight spilling across his face. The picture was taken from across the street. Someone had been watching him, watching long enough to know his routine. Earl's eyes flicked to the window, to the empty street outside, to the shadows between parked cars that suddenly felt alive. His hands shook as he picked up the phone and punched Henry's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then a click. But it wasn't Henry's voice on the other end. It was a whisper, low and smooth. "Stay on the route, Mr. Hughes or Henry. It's delivered first." The line went dead. Earl stared at the phone, breath ragged. His porch light flickered, and for the first time in years, Earl Hughes felt fear like a living thing crawling up his spine. He dropped into the chair, letters and photo spread across the table like a curse. There was no running now. Not from men who wrote the future in ink, not from ghosts who never stopped delivering death. He had 18 hours to figure out the route, 18 hours to keep Henry breathing and to keep his own name from being crossed off like junk mail. And the first stop? The place where the trail began, the old post office on Pratt Street. Earl grabbed his coat, and his gun retirement was over. The rain had thinned to a mist when Earl parked 3 blocks from the old Pratt Street post office. The building hunched at the edge of downtown like a relic too stubborn to fall. Its limestone walls were cracked and scabbed with graffiti windows blinded by plywood. The brass letters above the door still spelled out United States Postal Service, dulled to the color of old pennies. He killed the engine, slid his Glock from the glove box, and tucked it beneath his jacket. He hadn't carried a gun since the days he moonlighted as a security guard, but tonight wasn't about comfort. Tonight was about not ending up zipped in a bag. The letter in his pocket was a brand burned into his thoughts. Route resumes, next stop your porch, deadline midnight. He had 14 hours. Earl pushed through the rusted side gate and crept along the alley. The main door was chained, but the loading dock wasn't. A roll-up door sagged on its tracks, leaving a gap just wide enough for him to squeeze through. Inside, the dark smelled of mold and metal. His boots crunched on gravel scattered across the floor, each step loud as gunfire. Shafts of moonlight leaked through cracks in the roof, silvering the old conveyor belts and busted sorting bins like bones in a graveyard. He knew this place like an old scar. He'd started here in 78 sorting letters by hand, before machines took over. Now the silence pressed like a coffin lid. He moved toward the supervisor's office, perched above the floor, its windows clouded with grime. The stairs groaned under his weight, and for a second he froze, listening. Nothing but the hum of distant traffic and the whisper of rain through. Broken glass. The door was locked. He jammed his shoulder against it until the frame splintered and the door swung wide with a hollow crash. Inside, dust lay thick as frost. File cabinets lined the wall, drawers gaping like open mouths. Earl rifled through them, coughing, as paper snowed down, timesheet, supply orders, old route maps. Nothing. Then his eyes caught the safe waist-high steel wedged into the corner like a secret. The combination dial was red with rust, but the handle still gleamed faintly in the weak light. He didn't have tools, but he had memory. He'd fixed that safe more than once back in the day when someone forgot the combo. He knelt, wiped sweat from his brow, and spun the dial slow. 352216. The tumblers clicked like reluctant bones. The handle turned, the door swung open with a groan. Inside were 3 things. A thick yellow envelope stamped Montgomery PD Internal. A Polaroid photograph of 3 teenage boys grinning outside a liquor store. and a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Earl's fingers trembled as he lifted the Polaroid. The faces stared back through time, young, cocky shadows of men they'd become, and one of them, God help him, was Henry Cole. The others? Earl couldn't place them yet, but something about their postures felt familiar. He set the photo down and untied the ribbon. The letters were the same as the ones he'd found before, same cursive, same threats, but these were marked with names he recognized from old headlines. Councilman, cops, businessmen. Some crossed out in red, others circled. The last letter made his blood ice. It wasn't folded like the others, it was sealed pristine, addressed in that elegant script. To Earl Hughes, his throat locked. He tore it open with shaking hands. You carried their secrets for 40 years. Now you'll deliver their judgment. Finish the route or be finished. Underneath, 3 names in black. Ink: Henry Cole, Earl Hughes, Monica Hughes, his daughter's name. A noise cracked the silence, a sharp snap from the far side of the floor, like wood breaking. Earl froze, every nerve on fire. Footsteps, slow, deliberate crunching on gravel. He slipped the photo and letters into his jacket, yanked the Glock from his waistband, and slid behind the desk, heart pounding like a war drum. The footsteps grew louder, echoing against the steel bones of the old building. Then a voice, low and calm, curled through the dark. Mr. Hughes always knew you couldn't stay out of the bag. Scar Earl tightened his grip, breath shallow. The footsteps stopped just outside the office door. A shadow spilled across the threshold like oil. You got 2 choices, Earl. Scar said. Come finish the route, or let us finish it for you. The hum of the city outside felt 1,000 miles away. Earl's finger brushed the trigger. His daughter's name burned in his mind like a flare. He whispered to himself, voice raw, "Not my baby, not today." And then the lights exploded. A blinding flash seared the dark, followed by a roar of shattering glass. Earl dropped flat as a gunshot cracked the air and a bullet split the doorframe like kindling. The hunt had started. The flash burned white in Earl's vision, followed by the concussive blast of glass exploding inward. Shards hissed across the room like angry hornets. He hit the floor, cheeks scraping dust, ears ringing as his instincts screamed, move now. He rolled hard to the right, just as another gunshot cracked through the office door. The frame splintered inches from his head. Earl crawled toward the back wall, muscles, screaming eyes, scouring for an exit. The office window, shattered from the blast, yawned open behind him. It dropped to the sorting floor, 10 feet below. His knees cursed him, but his choices were to jump or die where he knelt. He holstered the Glock, shoved the stolen letters inside his jacket, and hurled himself backward through the window. Glass teeth bit into his sleeve as he landed in a crouch, the jolt rattling his spine. He staggered, bit back a groan, and bolted for the shadows of the conveyor belts above. Scar's voice slithered through the dark. Run, old man, make it fun. Boots thundered overhead. Another voice joined Scar's partner, gruffer, meaner. He's got the bag. Don't let him leave. Earl ducked behind a rusted bin, pulse hammering. His mind burned with one thought, Monica's name. On that list, he couldn't die here. Couldn't let this route claim her too. He crouched low and crept toward the loading dock, weaving through dead machinery. His shoes slipped on wet concrete as distant sirens wailed like ghosts beyond the walls. Then came a sound that made him freeze mid-step, a soft click behind him. Safety off. He spun, Glock raised too late. The figure lunged from the dark, gun flashing. Earl dove sideways, firing blind. The shot went wide, ricocheting off steel. The figure cursed, then vanished into the black. Earl didn't wait for round 2. He sprinted for the dock, boots hammering metal, every breath a knife in his chest. He shoved the roll-up door hard. It groaned, but lifted enough for him to duck under and spill into the rain-soaked alley. Cold night slapped his face as he ran, legs pumping like a man 40 years younger. Tires screeched behind him. Scar's crew wasn't done. He veered into a side street, lungs tearing, shadows swallowing him whole. By the time he collapsed against a brick wall 2 blocks away, his shirt clung with sweat and blood trickled from a gash on his arm. He pressed it with a rag torn from his sleeve breath, shuddering. His phone buzzed. Earl fumbled it out hard, thudding harder, when he saw the name on the screen, Henry Cole. He snatched it up. Henry, thank God you at the bar. Stay put, don't. A voice cut him off. Not Henry's calm, almost gentle Mr. Hughes. It said, smooth as oil on water. You missed a delivery. Earl's stomach dropped. Where's Henry? A pause, and a sound that froze his blood, a dull thud like a sack hitting concrete, followed by a slow exhale into the phone roots moving faster. Now the voice murmured, check Edmondson Avenue. Your friend's no longer pending. The line went dead. Earl stood there in the rain phone, slick in his hand, the world narrowing to a tunnel. Edmondson Avenue, that was Henry's haunt. He stumbled into the street, flagged the first cab he saw, barked the address like a man on fire. When the cab rolled up to Gibson's 20 minutes later, blue lights strobed the night. A crowd pressed against the police, taped their whispers, cutting the wet air. Earl pushed through, ignoring the shouts, the hands grabbing at his sleeve. His breath came in ragged gasps as he reached the edge of the tape and saw the sheet on the pavement white, soaked through. The cop guarding the line shoved a hand up. Sir, you can't. Earl's glare stopped him cold. He looked down at what the sheet tried and failed to hide. The boots were still visible, scuffed black leather. He'd teased Henry about for decades. Sob ripped from Earl's throat before he could choke it back. On the ground beside the body lay an envelope, rain washing the ink into pink rivers. Earl knelt, fingers trembling, as he peeled it open. Inside, 2 words delivered, next stop soon. Below that, a date in red ink, tonight midnight, and then scrawled like a blade, carving his soul, Monica Hughes. Earl's world tilted, rang, blurring everything but the name, his baby girl. The route wasn't just coming. It was sprinting straight for her door, and Earl Hughes was out of time. The rain clung to Earl like grief as he stood under the flickering streetlight, the letter burning in his palm, Monica's name, midnight. He stumbled back to the cab, voice raw, when he barked home fast. The driver glanced at him, saw the blood on his sleeve, and didn't ask questions. Tires hissed across wet asphalt as Baltimore blurred past in streaks of neon and rain. Earl's mind was a storm. He'd seen bodies before. 40 years in this city will do that. But Henry wasn't just another name on a slab. He was family, and the bastards who killed him had put Earl's baby on the same list. He couldn't wait for cops. They wouldn't believe him, and even if they did, he'd be filling out forms when the clock hit midnight. He needed answers, now. By the time Earl burst into his row house, his hands were shaking so bad he dropped the keys twice. He slammed the deadbolt, dragged the old trunk from under the bed, and yanked it open. Inside, 40 years of postal relics, route maps, time cards, old hand stamps, rubber bands brittle as autumn leaves. And at the bottom, the letters he'd snatched from the lodge, plus the ones already haunting his table. He spread them across the kitchen, like a madman piecing together a crime scene. The cursive ink curled across each page like a serpent's body taunting him. Not the first, not the last. Finished the route, delivered every. Message bore a number in the corner, tiny, almost invisible, written in red ink. Number 28, number 29, number 30. He hadn't noticed before. Earl grabbed a pen and notepad, scribbling the numbers in order. Darlene Watts dead, Henry Cole dead, Monica Hughes next. His chest tightened. Was it just a kill count? Or something worse? He scanned the letters again. That's when he saw it. Each red number was underlined twice, except the one on the newest note. That one had 3 lines, and the letters weren't random. Either the first letter of each victim's last name formed a pattern, WCH. He rifled through the stack until his fingers hit the Polaroid from the safe, the 3 teenage boys outside the liquor store. He stared at their faces, at the easy grins, and then down at the names scrawled on the photo's back. Watkins, Cole, Hines. Earl's blood ran cold. They weren't random victims. They were tying off an old, not killing everyone connected to those boys. Everyone who knew what happened the night his picture was taken. His hands trembled as memory dragged him back, 1979 summer. Heat curling off the asphalt. Whispers about a liquor store job gone sideways. He'd heard rumors back then. Cops on the take, witnesses who vanished, a clerk dead behind the counter. And one name from those rumors kept rattling in his skull, now like a loose bullet: Ralph Hines, the third boy, the one still alive. Earl checked the photo again. Ralph stood at the edge, head tilted like he owned the block, and behind him, something Earl hadn't noticed before: a wall, plastered with flyers. One read Baltimore Elks Lodge Summer Dance, July 7th. The same lodge where he'd nearly died tonight. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the route. Earl flipped the last letter over, looking for more clues, and there it was, a faint watermark, bleeding through the paper, a series of dots. Not random. He knew that pattern zip code sorting marks. Whoever wrote these had access to postal machinery or knew someone who did. He sketched the dots on the pad, then dug out his old route books. 10 minutes later, the pieces snapped into place like teeth on a trap. The dots formed an address. 2024 Edmondson Avenue, Unit 3. Earl's breath hitched. That building had been condemned for years. But if this gain tied back to 1979, it made sense they'd use a dead place to hide a living secret. He checked the clock, 10:43 p.m. 77 minutes until midnight. He slid the Glock into his waistband, stuffed the letters in a canvas bag, and grabbed the Polaroid. His knees ached like hell as he limped to the door, but he didn't slow. As he stepped into the rain, his phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He answered, voice raw. "You bastards are done." A chuckle oozed through the line like oil. "Tick-tock, Mr. Unit 3's waiting. Deliver or we do." The call cut. Earl stood frozen for half. A beat rain dripping off his brow. His fists clenched so tight, his knuckles burned. They knew he'd cracked it. They wanted him there, and he was going. Not for their game, for Monica, and maybe for the truth that should have stayed buried in 1979. Rain-slicked streets shimmered under the jaundiced glow of broken street lamps as Earl's old Ford rattled down Edmondson Avenue. The wipers struggled against the downpour, smearing the city's lights into ghostly streaks. Earl's eyes cut between the road and the glowing green digits of the dashboard clock. 11:24 p.m. 36 minutes until midnight. 36 minutes to stop the route. The letters, the Polaroid, and the Glock sat on the passenger seat. His fingers brushed the grip every time he hit a red light, like touching it would anchor him Unit 3. That's where they wanted him. A condemned building with a ghost address. Everything about it stank like a setup, but he had no choice. Not with Monica's name inked in blood-red letters. The building squatted at the corner like a wounded animal. Windows, boarded doors, chained, rain sheeted off, its brick face pooling in the potholes like black mirrors. Earl killed the headlights and parked half a block away, engine humming low like a prayer. He sat there for a long second, listening to the rain whisper against the roof, breathing through the rage and fear strangling his chest. Then he tucked the Glock under his jacket and slid into the night. Every step toward that building felt like a mile, the rain soaking his collar, his pulse hammering louder than the storm. He reached the side alley, eyes sweeping for movement. Nothing but trash cans and the rust stink of wet iron. The padlock on the side door was gone. Just dangling chains slick with rain. They'd left it open for him. Come finish the route. Scar's voice echoed in his head. Earl eased inside, closing the door soft behind him. Darkness swallowed him whole. The smell hit first rot and mildew, layered with something sour, something wrong. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam carved through the dark, revealing peeling wallpaper roaches scattering across warped floorboards, graffiti, curling like black veins on the walls. He moved slow, every sense stretched thin. The building breathed around him, drips from the ceiling, the groan of old wood, the whisper of wind threading through cracks. The letters said Unit 3. He scanned the faded numbers stenciled on the doors as he crept down the hall. 1, 2. The third door waited at the end. Half-open light flickered inside, sickly yellow, pulsing like a dying heart. Earl raised the Glock finger, kissing the trigger, as he nudged the door wider with his boot. The smell hit harder, now thick and sweet, like old meat left in summer heat. His light swept the room and froze. A chair sat in the center, under a single swinging. Bulb rope curled around its arms like snakes, and on the chair, a shape slumped forward head, hooded in black plastic. Earl's breath caught. His hands shook as he stepped closer, ripped the hood away. Henry. But not Henry alive. Henry cold. Eyes wide and glassy mouth slack in a final scream. A jagged slit across his throat, gaped like a second. Smile and pinned to his chest with a rusted postal spike and envelope white clean. His name written on it, Earl Hughes. The room tilted. He ripped the letter free, tore it open with hands trembling like leaves. You delivered. Now the route ends where it started. Below that, in blood-red ink, Pratt Street Post Office basement, midnight. A sound sliced through the silence. A low chuckle from the shadows. Earl spun flashlight, jerking across cracked walls, until it found him Scar. Standing easy in the doorway, rain dripping off his cap, a pistol dangling from his hand like an afterthought. Behind him another man filled the frame, thick-necked, dead eyes. Scar's grin was all teeth. Knew you'd come, old man. Always were loyal to the root. Earl's voice cracked like old timber. Why, Henry? Why drag me into this? Scar stepped closer, boots crunching glass. Because this isn't about Henry Earl. Never was. This is about debt, 40 years overdue. Earl's got twisted. What debt? Scar tilted his head, smile widening. The one you signed when you kept your mouth shut in. 79 liquor store job, 3 boys, 1 body on the floor. You remember, don't you? The Polaroid burned in Earl's pocket like a hot coal. His stomach lurched. He did remember the whispers the night. Henry came knocking, begging him to stash a bag. Just for a while. Earl never opened it. Never asked. Just locked it in a postal crate and prayed it disappeared. Scar's grin sharpened. You helped bury a cop's son, Earl Ralph Hines' daddy. That's why the list started. That's why it don't end, till every name tied to that night is dust. You Henry Monica. He let the word linger like poison, and anyone else carrying that bloodline. Earl's finger tightened on the trigger. You touch my daughter, and I swear. Scar raised his free hand, mock gentle, easy postman. You want her alive? You bring that crate, the one from 79 Pratt Street, midnight. That's the last delivery. Do it, and maybe the route retires. Earl's heart slammed the crate. He hadn't thought about it in decades, but he knew where it was buried under dust in the Pratt Street basement. Scar's smile thinned, clocks ticking. Earl, don't be late. The 2 men slipped back into the shadows, their boots fading like thunder into silence. Earl stood shaking breath, ragged gun dangling in his fist, as the truth hollowed him out. This wasn't random. This wasn't madness. This was justice mailed first class. And if he didn't find that crate before midnight, his baby girl was dead. Earl's old Ford groaned down Pratt Street like a wounded beast, wipers slapping frantic against the glass. The dashboard clock glared. 11:46 p.m. 14 minutes to midnight. 14 minutes to keep Monica breathing. The letters rode shotgun, that last one screaming in his head. Pratt Street Post Office basement, midnight, the crate. His hands clenched the wheel until his knuckles burned. The ghosts of 1979 rode with him. Henry's grin, Ralph Hines' sharp eyes, whispers about a liquor store job gone wrong. Earl had buried it all under silence, and years thinking time would bleach the blood out. But time had a way of sending letters back, and now the final delivery had his daughter's name on it. The building loomed through the rain, a black husk against the bruised sky. Earl killed the lights and rolled up slow gravel, crunching under bald tires. He grabbed the Glock and the canvas bag, shoved the Polaroid inside, and slipped out into the wet night. The side gate yawned where he'd forced it earlier, the lock hanging like a broken tooth. He slid through boots, squelching in mud, and eased the roll-up door high enough to duck under. Inside, the dark swallowed him whole. His flashlight carved thin blades of light across the sorting floor, The machines crouched like rusted beasts in shadow. Every drip of water, every creak of old steel, sounded like a footstep stalking him. He moved fast breath, clouding in the damp, past the shattered office where Scar had cornered him hours ago, down the stairs into the bowels of the building, where the air grew thick and sour in the walls. Sweated grime, the basement stretched out like a crypt rows of collapsed shelves, broken carts and shadows that twitched when his light swept them. Rats' scurried tails slapping concrete. The crate, where the hell would they have stored it? He dropped the bag, ripped open an old locker, and another rusted hinges screamed dust, billowing like dead breath. Nothing but rotted uniforms and mold-eaten ledgers. Come on, he muttered, voice raw. The clock in his head roared louder with every second. He kicked through debris, eyes scanning until his beam snagged on a far corner, a stack of crates, tarps draped like burial shrouds. He tore the cover away, coughing, as dust stung his throat. 3 crates, splintered wood stamped with faded ink. Property of U.S. Postal Service, and scrawled in black marker barely legible, after decades, number 117, hold. His stomach dropped. He remembered that code crates marked hold were never supposed to move, never supposed to open. Special instructions from above. His hands shook as he pried the lid with a rusted crowbar, the wood-screened nails tearing free like teeth. The lid crashed to the floor, and the smell hit him thick and rotten, the stench of something that had no business breathing air again. Inside wasn't mail. It was bones. Bundles of cloth wrapped around skeletons, ropes still biting their brittle wrists. Skulls grinning through the shreds of flesh that time hadn't finished. Earl staggered back, bile clawing his throat. There were 3 bodies in that crate. 3. And on top of them, a single envelope, crisp and white, like a shroud, his name inked in that same looping hand. He ripped it open with bloodless fingers. They thought it was robbery. It wasn't. It was cleanup. The boys were loose ends. You kept the secret, Earl. Now you pay the balance. Bring the Polaroid upstairs, midnight, below that in red ink. One of them lived, and he's standing behind you. The words stabbed through him like ice. Earl spun, flashlight jerking. The beam slashed across wet concrete, empty. He swung wider rows of shelvesmen shadows, crouching like wolves. Heart pounding so loud it drowned the storm above. Then footsteps, soft, slow, coming closer from the black. In a long time, Earl. The voice was gravel, and smoke dredged from a grave 40 years deep. Ralph Hines stepped into the light like a ghost wearing flesh. Older now, but the eyes were the same, hard, sharp, holding a grudge that outlived decades. Rain dripped from his coat pistol, glinting in his hand. I figured you'd dig up the past, Ralph said, smile cold as the grave. You always were loyal. That's why they trusted you. Earl's throat clenched. Ralph, Jesus, you. You thought you could bury it all? Ralph's laugh was a blade. Those boys in that crate. They were witnesses, Earl. Same as you. Only difference is you kept your mouth shut. Bought you 40 good years. His grin widened, teeth like tombstones. Now I'm here to collect. Debt don't die. The Glock in Earl's hand felt like lid. His knees ached, his chest burned, but rage flared hotter than fear. You put Monica on that list. Earl rasped. You'll never walk out breathing. Ralph tilted his head, almost amused. Midnight Earl. Upstairs, bring the photo, or she stops breathing first. From the shadows behind Ralph's Scar emerged, gun raised, smile wide. Clocks running. Old man Earl's flashlight trembled. The Polaroid in his pocket felt like the heaviest thing in the world. Midnight was 3 minutes away, and Earl Hughes was standing in Hell's basement. The clock on Earl's phone glared 11:57 p.m. as Ralph and Scar herded him up the basement stairs. His breath came in short, sharp bursts, every step driving the weight of 40 years deeper into his bones. The Polaroid burned in his pocket like a loaded gun. Rain roared against the roof as they pushed into the sorting floor. The old post office gaped wide in the dark conveyor. Belts sprawled like dead serpents, shadows twitching under the swing of a single hanging bulb. In the center of the floor stood a table draped in filthy canvas, and on it Earl's soul almost ripped out of him Monica. Hands bound gag pressed tight against her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. As they locked on him, rain-damp hair clung to her cheeks, tears streaking through the grime. "Daddy," she tried to speak through the gagged voice broken Earl's knees, almost gave, but Ralph's hand gripped his collar, shoving him forward. "Easy now," Ralph murmured, voice slick with venom. "We finished the route together." Scar circled to Monica, his grin a slice of cruelty, as he laid a knife on the table beside her face. "Pretty girl," he said softly, letting the blade catch the light. "Hate to ruin her smile." Earl's grip tightened on the Glock rage, boiling through every brittle nerve. But Ralph pressed his pistol against Earl's temple before he could twitch photo. Ralph said now. Earl hesitated, then dug the Polaroid from his pocket and slapped it on the table. Rainwater from his coat smeared the edges. Ralph picked it up, holding it like a sacred relic. 4 boys that night, Ralph said, eyes glinting in the dim. Me, Henry Watkins, and the clerk who didn't walk out breathing. Remember him, Earl? White kid Daddy wore a badge. Daddy wanted it cleaned up quiet, so they called us. His laugh was a jagged blade. We were just kids. But you were the mule. Carried the bag, hid the crate, shut your mouth. Thought it made you clean. Earl's voice rasped from the bottom of his chest. I didn't know what was in that bag. Don't matter, Ralph hissed. You touch the root, you ride it to the end. He flicked the Polaroid with his thumb. They all paid. Now it's your turn. Scar leaned close to Monica Blade, kissing her cheek. Or hers. Something broke in Earl then. The years of silence, the weight of sins that weren't his, but stuck to him like tar. All of it burned away in one blinding surge. His right hand jerked like a lightning strike. The Glock roared the shot, cracking the hollow air. Scar's grin exploded into a scream as the bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him sideways, knife clattering. Ralph cursed and lunged, gun snapping up, but Earl was already moving. He drove his elbow into. Ralph's jaw felt the bone crack and wrenched the pistol free. Another shot split the dark Ralph, staggering back as hot blood sprayed across the filthy floor. Earl dove for the table, ripping the gag from Monica's mouth, as Scar howled behind them, clutching his arm. Run, baby, Earl panted, sawing at her ropes with the blade. Scar dropped run. She hit the floor barefoot and sprinted for the side door just as Ralph roared and fired blind. The bullet screamed past Earl's ear, punching a hole in the wall. Earl spun and emptied the Glock shots, booming like thunder. Ralph jerked twice, 3 times, and went down hard, the Polaroid fluttering from his hand like a dead leaf. Scar staggered toward the door, blood slicking his jacket, eyes wild. Earl raised the gun, breath like fire, and put him down cold. Silence crashed in, broken only by the hiss of rain through shattered glass and Earl's ragged breaths. He stood trembling, gun dangling, eyes burning holes in Ralph's sprawled body. The clock on his phone blinked. 12:03 a.m. The route was over. He stumbled to the Polaroid, lying in a puddle of blood, picked it up with shaking fingers. 3 boys grinned at him from another lifetime. Henry Watkins, Ralph, and a 4th figure half-shadowed in the corner, barely visible, Earl's own young face, mouth, hard eyes empty. The boy who carried a bag and never asked why tears blurred his vision. He let the photo fall. Monica's voice cut through the haze. Daddy, she was at the door, hair plastered to her face, fear and love warring in her eyes. Earl holstered the Glock, wiped his bloody hands on his coat, and walked to her when she threw her arms around him. He held on like a man gripping the last solid thing in a sinking world. Is it over? She whispered. Earl looked back at the floor, the bodies, the blood, the letters scattered like fallen leaves. No, baby, he murmured, voice low as the rain. It never ends. Not in this city. He kissed her forehead and led her into the night as sirens began to wail in the distance, chasing ghosts that would never stay buried. Behind them, the post office stood silent, its walls fat with secrets. And on the table, a single envelope lay where Ralph had dropped it, its flap-sealed ink still wet. To whoever opens this next, a route always resumes what you just heard wasn't the full story. It was the part someone tried to bury, the part that didn't fit the headline, the part where a person not a suspect was lost in the process. This case showed us what happens when the system moves too fast or not at all, when suspicion weighs more than truth, when justice shows up late or never. But here's the thing. If these stories don't leave us asking questions, they'll keep repeating with different names. So if this one meant something to you, don't just move on, talk about it, question it, pass it on. Because silence protects the wrong side of history, and sometimes the only thing standing between truth and erasure is someone who chooses to care. Like, share, comment. Let the next chapter begin with awareness, not regret.